Knox County students. I'm Mandy Hipsher and I teach at Whittle Springs Middle School. Today's lesson is based on the week 1 assignment for 6th grade ELA. If you don't have this assignment, you can find it by visiting the KCS website at knoxschools.org. Click where it says Student Resources. If you would like to have this lesson printed for you, the middle school packets are handed out on Mondays between 10 and noon at each of our meal distribution sites. A list of those sites can be found under the Meal Distribution tab at the KCS website. Please be sure to complete the entire week's assignment before continuing this video. Like I said, if you haven't completed this week's 1 assignment, stop and return to this video once you have finished your work so we can go over it together. Now, let's get started. All right, so this week's assignment was based off of the text, The Market Square Dog by James Herriot. Now, I actually loved this story when I was in 5th grade. It was my favorite. So much that I checked it out so many times, our librarian actually gave it to me, or at least a copy of it. Okay, so we're gonna try to share my screen so I can show you what we were supposed to work on first, which was to read and annotate the text. All right, well, we'll see if we can make this work. Okay, so your first step was to read and annotate. When we annotate a text, we do a couple of things. We want to mark it, but we also want to make sure that we're making connections as we read. Those connections could be summarizing what the paragraphs or what we think the main point is about, or it can be a connection that we might make personally. Okay. Another thing that I always do whenever there's an assignment like this is I always recommend that you go and you look at any questions that you're going to have to answer first. Okay, so when we look at the questions, it gives us a purpose for our reading. So I know what I want to be looking for. When I looked at the purpose for this reading, the questions had a lot to do with what the theme was, as well as having to summarize, paraphrase the text, and answer a few questions about one of the characters, as well as the narrator and his wife. So those are things I want to make sure that I'm paying attention to and marking as I read. Okay? So if you notice, I've actually already marked my text. Okay, I've highlighted, I have circled some words that I thought were vocabulary words or words that I felt like maybe were something that we might not understand right off the bat. I also made some notes. I made my notes in blue, okay, as we go through it. So I'm gonna just go ahead and start off and just read this text to you. Okay? And as we go through it, just notice the places that I've highlighted, circled, and the blue notes that I've made to the side. Also, one thing we always want to make sure we do is number our paragraphs. So this article already had some of the paragraphs marked for you or numbered for you. And I just went back in and added the rest of those numbers. Okay? There were a lot. So if you were one of my students, I know you complained right now. Okay, so The Market Square Dog by James Herriot. On market days, when the farmers around Derby brought their goods to Little Town to sell, I used to take a walk across the cobbled square to meet the farmers who gathered there to chat. One of the farmers was telling me about his sick cow when he saw the little dog among the market stalls. The thing that made us notice the dog was that he was sitting up, begging, in front of the stall, selling cakes and biscuits. Look at that little chap, the farmer said. I wonder where he comes from. As he spoke, the stall holder threw him a bun, which the dog devoured eagerly. But when the man came around the corner and stretched out a hand, the little animal trotted away. He stepped, however, at another stall which sold eggs, butter, cheese, and scones. Without hesitation, he sat up again in the begging position, rock steady, paws dangling, head pointing expectantly. I nudged my companion. There he goes again. I always think a dog looks very appealing sitting up like that. The farmer nodded. Yes, he's a bonny little thing, isn't he? What breed would you call him? A cross, I'd say. He's like a small sheepdog, but there's a touch of something else. Maybe terrier. It wasn't long before the dog was munching a biscuit, and this time I walked over to him. As I drew near, I spoke gently. Here, boy, I said, squatting down in front of him. Come on, let's have a look at you. He turned to face me, and for a moment 2 friendly brown eyes gazed at me from a wonderfully attractive face. The fringed tail waved in response to my words, but as I moved nearer, he turned and trotted among the market day crowd until he was lost to sight. I was standing there, trying to see where he had gone, when a young policeman came up to me. I've been watching that wee dog begging among the stalls all morning, he said. But, like you, I haven't been able to get near him. Yes, it's strange. You can see he's friendly, but he's also afraid. I wonder who owns him. I reckon he's a stray, Mr. Harriet. I'm interested in dogs myself, and fancy I know just about all of them around here, but this one is a stranger to me. I nodded. I'm sure you're right. Anything could have happened to him. He could have been ill treated by somebody and run away, or he could have been dumped from a car. Yes, the policeman replied. There are some cruel people about. I don't know how anybody can leave a helpless animal to fend for itself like that. I've had a few tries at catching him, but it's no good. The memory stayed with me for the rest of the day. It is our duty to look after the animals who depend on us, and it worried me to think of the little creature wandering about in a strange place, sitting up and asking for help the only way he knew. Market day is on a Monday, and on the Friday of that week, my wife Helen and I had treat planned for ourselves. We were going to the races in Broughton. Helen was making up a picnic basket with homemade ham and egg pie, chicken sandwiches, and a chocolate cake. I was wearing my best suit, and I couldn't help feeling very smart because country vets have to work mostly in the fields and cowsheds, and I hardly ever got dressed up. Helen, too, had put on her best dress and a fancy hat I had never seen before. As a vet's wife, she too had to work very hard, and we weren't able to go out very often. We were just about to leave the house when the doorbell rang. It was the young policeman I had been talking to on market day. I've got that dog, Mr. Harriet, he said. You know, the one that was begging in the market square? Oh, good, I replied. So you managed to catch him at last. The policeman paused. No, not really. One of our men found him lying by the roadside about a mile out of town and brought him in. I'm afraid he's been knocked down. We've got him here in the car. I went out and looked into the car. The little dog was lying very still on the back seat, but when I stroked the dark coat, his tail stirred briefly. He can still manage a wag anyway, I said. The policeman nodded. Yes, there's no doubt he's a good-natured wee thing. I tried to examine him as much as possible without touching because I didn't want to hurt him, but I could see that he had cuts all over his body, and one hind leg lay in such a way that I knew it must be broken. When I gently lifted his head, I saw that one eyelid was badly torn so that the eye was completely closed, but the other soft brown eye looked at me trustingly. Can you do anything for him, Mr. Harriet? Asked the policeman. Can you save him? I'll do my best, I replied. I carried the little animal into the surgery and laid him on the table. There's an hour or two's work here, Helen, I said to my wife. I'm very sorry, but we won't be able to get to the races. Never mind, she replied. We must do what we can for this fellow. Rather sadly, she took off her fancy hat, and I took off my good jacket. Dressed in our white coats, we began to work. Helen was used to helping me, and she gave me the anesthetic. Then I set the broken leg in plaster and stitched up the wounds. The worst thing was the eye, because even after I had stitched the eyelid, it was still bruised and tightly closed, and I was worried he might lose sight in that eye. By the time we had finished, it was too late to go out anywhere, but Helen was quite cheerful. We can still have our picnic, she said. We carried the sleeping dog out to the garden, and I laid him on a mat on the lawn so that we could watch him as he came round from the anesthetic. Out there in the old, high-walled garden, the sun shone down on the flowers and the apple trees. Helen put on her fancy hat again, and I put my smart jacket back on as we sat there, enjoying the good things from the picnic basket. We felt that we were still having a day out. But Helen kept glancing anxiously at the little dog, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Would he be all right after all that we had done for him? And, even then, what was going to happen to him? Would his owners ever come claim him? Because if he didn't, he had nobody in the world to look after him. Since he had been found by the police, he was classified as a stray and had to go into the kennels at the police station. When I visited him there 2 days later, he greeted me excitedly, balancing well on his plastered leg, his tail swishing. All his fears seemed to have gone. I was delighted to see that the injured eye was now fully open and the swelling down. The young policeman was as pleased as I was. Look at that, he exclaimed. He's nearly as good as new again. Yes, I said, he's done wonderfully well. I hesitated for a moment. Has anybody inquired about him? He shook his head. Nothing yet, but we'll keep hoping. And in the meantime, we'll take good care of him here. I visited the kennels often, and each time the shaggy little creature jumped up to greet me, laughing into my face, mouth open, eyes shining. Nobody seemed to want him. After a few more days, it was clear that no owner was going to claim him, and my only hope was that somebody else would take him and give him a home. There were other stray dogs in the kennels, and on one visit, I saw a farmer calling to collect his wandering sheepdog. Then a family was overjoyed at being united with their handsome golden retriever. Finally, a little old lady came in and tearfully gathered her tiny Yorkshire Terrier to her arms. But nobody came for my little patient. Various strangers came too, looking for a pet, but nobody seemed to be interested in him. Maybe it was because he was only a mongrel, and the people who visited the kennels wanted a more elegant dog. Yet I knew that he would make a perfect pet for anybody. A week passed before I went again to the police station. The little dog's kennel was empty. "What's happened?" I asked the policeman. "Has somebody taken him?" The policeman looked very grave. "No," he replied. "I'm afraid he's been arrested." "Arrested?" I said in astonishment. "What do you mean?" "Well," he said, "it seems that it's against the law for a dog to go begging in the market square, so he has been taken into police custody." I was bewildered. "What are you talking about? A dog can't be arrested." The policeman, still very solemn, shrugged his shoulder. "This dog was." "I still don't know what this is all about," I said. "Where is he now?" "I'll take you to him," the policeman replied. We left the police station and walked a short way along the road to a pretty cottage. We went inside and there, in the sitting room, curled up in a big new doggy bed, was my little friend. Two small girls were sitting by his side, stroking his coat. The policeman threw back his head and laughed. "I've just been kidding you, Mr. Harriet. This is my house, and I'm taking him as a pet for my two daughters. They've been wanting a dog for some time, and I've gotten so fond of this wee chap that I thought he'd be just right for them." A wave of relief swept over me. "Well, that's wonderful," I said, and I looked at his kind face gratefully. "What's your name?" I asked. "Phelps," he replied. "P.C. Phelps. And they call me Funny Phelps at the police station because I like playing jokes on people." "Well, you certainly took me in," I said. "Arrested indeed." He laughed again. "Well, you've got to admit, he's in the hands of the law now." I laughed too. I didn't mind having the joke played on me because, Funny Phelps or not, he was obviously a nice Phelps and would be a kind master for my doggy friend. It was a happy day when I took the plaster off the little dog's leg and found that the break had healed perfectly. All the nasty cuts had healed too. And when I lifted him down from the table, the small girls held up a beautiful new red collar with a lead to match. Their new pet liked the look of them because he sat up in that position I remembered so well, his paws dangling, his face looking up eagerly. The begging dog had found home at last. Okay, so, all right, so after reading and then going through the text and annotating, if you go back through and actually looked at some of the notes that I'd made while I was going through it, I wanted to focus a lot on how they interacted with the dog, how the characters were, and how they treated the dog. Focusing a lot on how they cared for him and were kind to him, and how the dog then responded to how they were acting to him. Right, so that's what most of my notes were. Now, I know that all of your teachers probably have their own little specific way that they like you to annotate a text. So if yours looks a little different than mine, that's totally okay. This is just how I did it. And when you annotate things, like I said, sometimes they're going to look a little bit different. It's all right. There's not one perfect way to do it, as long as you're marking it, making notes, and making connections as you go. Okay. All right, so that was day one. All right, so day two, on Tuesday, you guys were to actually take that text and paraphrase it to someone in your home, okay? Paraphrasing is a little bit different than summarizing. We want to make sure that when you are paraphrasing, first of all, you're using your words, not the text words. That's plagiarism. And you want to make sure that you're really focusing on kind of what you've learned from that story while you're talking about it. And lots of times a paraphrase can be almost as long as the story itself, because you're putting all of that story into your own words. Okay? So you were supposed to paraphrase. Hopefully you did that. The next step was for you to actually work in that packet, and you were going to write a summary of what you've read. You're supposed to go back, read the story again, and write a summary. So summaries are different than a paraphrase, because with a summary, we want to keep it shorter, and you want to make sure that you're just sticking to the main points. Whereas a paraphrase, you're really going back through the whole story again. A summary, we're focusing on the key details and the most important parts. And it's going to be a whole lot shorter. summaries are short, okay? So let's take a look at one that I wrote. We'll see if I can make this work. Okay, so let's take a look at the summary. All right, so here's a summary that I wrote based off of this text. I said, the narrator and a policeman are both intrigued by a stray dog they discover at the market. The dog is friendly while it begs for food, but it is also afraid. Days later, the narrator and his wife are on their way to a picnic when the policeman arrives with a dog. The dog has been injured and requires the narrator's veterinarian skills to save its life. Both the narrator and his wife save the dog before he is taken to the kennels because he's a stray. The narrator checks on him until one day he is no longer there. To the narrator's surprise, the policeman adopts the dog and takes him home to his family to live with them. The dog is healthy and happy in his new home. Okay? So notice, very short, okay? Not long, not drawn out. I tried to just stick to what the main points were. Okay, there was a stray dog, kind of how that stray dog was, the fact that it was saved by the narrator, and the fact that that policeman adopted it. Just kind of, like I said, main points. Not a lot. If you notice in your packet, there wasn't a big space for you to write the summary because it shouldn't have been that long. Okay, and I know how some of my honor students are, and they like to write a whole lot. Summaries are good practice to make sure that you're just sticking to the main points and the details. Okay, all right. So for Thursday took you into, or the fourth day. Sorry, my days are all long. On the Thursday, you were supposed to actually focus on a couple things. Finding the theme of the story as well as some evidence to support if that was your theme or not. Okay? So let's take a second and let's actually go and kind of review what theme is. Let's see if I can get mine pulled up here. Okay, so just to review, okay. Theme is the life lesson of a story, okay? It's what you're supposed to learn from it. It's the meaning, the moral, the message about life, okay? It's what the story is meant to teach you, okay? And so theme is a little bit different than central idea, okay? So we want to focus on how to identify it. So the theme, they don't come right out and say it, okay? It's not clearly stated. It's not explicit. It's what we call implied, meaning we as the reader, we have to figure that out. And we figure that out through the details and the support that's provided in the story, okay? But the theme is bigger than just that one story, okay? You've got the world of the story, but you've got the bigger world of the theme. So what you learn from that story is something that you can apply to life, not just that story. So you don't want your theme to be story specific, if that makes sense. So for example, for this story, you're not going to focus on something like the dog learned this or the narrator said this. Okay, that makes it story specific. We want to focus on the theme that we can learn and take and apply to our lives. Okay, so big picture, not small picture. All right, hopefully that makes sense. So looking at the theme, okay. All right, guys, I have to keep shuffling back and forth, but I'm going to get there, okay? So looking at the theme of this story, you could go with a couple of different things probably, but somewhere along the lines, you're going to focus on the fact that showing animals kindness can have a huge impact on their lives, okay? This focus of the story really centers around how these humans treated this dog and how the dog was able to thrive because of it. Okay, so the kindness that they showed through gently touching them and petting him, through saving his life, through all the interactions with him, okay, that kindness did something for that dog. Whether it had been abused in past life, we don't know, but all we know is that because of the way they treated it, he was able to thrive. So the lesson, the theme being showing animals kindness can have a huge impact on their lives. Okay, so hopefully you got something close to that. Again, if it wasn't these exact words, it's going to be okay, but that's kind of the one that we were really looking for. Okay, now the next thing you're supposed to do was actually find a piece of evidence to support that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the text, and actually something that I had already highlighted in there was my evidence for that. Because again, I read over the questions before I annotated my text, so I knew what my purpose in reading was, and I knew I needed to look for some things that had to do with the theme. Okay, so let's take a second. let's go back to that text. And it was actually earlier on the text, around paragraphs. Let's see here. Oops, I think I skipped it. Around paragraph 35, that's where it was. Okay. So where it said, when I visited him there 2 days later, he greeted me excitedly, balancing well on his plastered leg, his tail swishing, all his fears seemed to have gone. Okay. So even though this dog has obviously had a lot of things happen to it, and even most recently it had been injured, and we don't know if it was injured because it had been hit by a car, but it hit by a person in a fight, we don't know what it was, but obviously been injured. Okay, but still his fear had gone, and he trusted these people because of how they treated him. Okay, their kindness changed his life and made an impact. Okay, so that's just one piece of evidence that you could use to support the theme, being that showing animals kindness can have a huge impact on their lives. Okay, all right, moving on. Okay, so our next day's questions. Sorry guys, like I said, I keep having to flip back and forth, but I'm getting better at it, I think. I'm sure when you got this packet, you thought that it was like super big. Okay. All right, so moving on. Okay, so other questions that you were supposed to answer for the Thursday section. Which two character traits describe both the narrator and the policeman in the story? Okay, so our two main characters, aside from our stray dog, the Market Square Dog. So looking at that, we were supposed to pick two character traits that we felt like described both of those characters. So looking at them, again, I went back to some of the things that I had highlighted in my text, different things that they had said. Okay, so if we go back to our text and look at some of the notes and things that I had highlighted. So I want to focus a lot on what the characters were saying and how they're acting. So when we're looking at traits, we look at different things, how the character acts, what their speech is, their thoughts, how they interact with others, their actions, their looks, things like that can tell us a lot about who they are as a character. So looking at it, I see a lot of things like how the narrator was showing kindness as he gently spoke to the dog. I see how the policeman interacts, how he talks about how he doesn't know if anyone can leave the helpless animal. Obviously, he's caring. So caring was one of our choices, and I feel like we definitely have evidence to support that. So one of the character traits would be caring. That was answer A. Okay. Other traits, if you look at them, okay, obviously, they both have a really good sense of humor, because at the end, when the policeman decides to pull that joke on him about, on the narrator about the dog being arrested, they both handle it really well. Okay, first the policeman being the one joking, and second of all, the narrator handling the joke well. Okay, he didn't get mad in the end, he took the joke and he thought it was funny. Okay, so both of them have a comical sense about them. So caring and comical would be your answer choices for those. Okay. And then the next one actually ties right into what we were just doing, which was me going back to my text and looking for that evidence to support those traits. Okay, so you're looking at which traits, or two quotes to support those traits. Okay, so the first one, okay, let's see here, I selected was from paragraphs 25 and 26. Okay, where the policeman was saying, can you do anything for him, Mr. Harriet? Asked the policeman, can you save him? I'll do my best, I replied. Right, so that definitely would show that caring, and it shows it for both of them. Okay, so that would be an excellent one to select. Okay, so that was answer choice B. And then our second one, if we go right towards the end in paragraph 60, okay, or 61, I'm sorry, where he says, I laughed too. I didn't mind having the joke played on me because, funny Phelps or not, he was obviously a nice Phelps and would be a kind master for my doggy friend. Right, so that showed us that whole comical sense that they both had, where they both laughed about it, they both thought it was funny, they had a good chuckle. Ha. Okay. All right, so I think that's going to take us to Friday. So the last thing that we were having to do, okay, was to actually write a paragraph. Okay? So for that paragraph, okay, sorry. For the paragraph, you're supposed to answer that question. How does the author's use of the first person point of view emphasize the narrator's concern and affection for the dog? Okay, so again, whenever we're looking at point of view, always think that our writer, our author, had a reason for choosing that point of view. Okay, and so in this case, our narrator, right, uses first person. And because it uses first person, we're able to really see how that narrator feels about this dog. It plays an important role. If it was written in third person, for example, we might not get that same feeling about really what the narrator thinks about this and how he feels about this dog and about saving animals. Right? So the point of view plays a really important role. Right? So I'm going to show you a paragraph. Okay, and just compare it to yours and see if you were able to do that. Now remember, when we're writing a paragraph, we want to make sure we're doing a few things. We wanted to make sure that we used text evidence to support our answers. We want to make sure that we're using complete sentences. And we really want to make sure that we're explaining that evidence and making connections as to how that evidence supports our answer. Okay. So here's an example for you. Again, our question was, how does the author's use of first person point of view emphasize the narrator's concern and affection for the dog? Right? So if you notice in my paragraph, immediately, I do something that I always teach my students to do, which is to restate our question and our answer. Right? The author's use of first person point of view emphasizes a narrator's concern and affection for the dog throughout the text. For instance, from the very beginning, the narrator describes the dog as having two friendly brown eyes and a wonderfully attractive face, paragraph 8. From the first time the narrator sees the dog, it is clear that he cares for him. The narrator shows deep concern for the dog's injuries and eventual recovery. For example, when the dog is first brought to Mr. Harriet, he reveals that I tried to examine him as much as possible without touching because I didn't want to hurt him, paragraph 24. After attending to the dog's injuries, the narrator further worries about what will happen to the dog if no one claims him, wondering, would he be all right after all that we had done for him? And even then, what was going to happen to him? Paragraph 34. Furthermore, relief and joy are conveyed through the first person point of view when the police officer decided to adopt the dog. A wave of relief swept over me, paragraph 57, and I laughed too. I didn't mind having the joke played on me because, funny Phelps or not, he was obviously a nice Phelps. It would be a kind master for my doggy friend. Paragraph 61. The narrator is elated that the dog will have a home and family. All the emotions that are expressed through the first person point of view stress how much the speaker cares for the dog. So again, you probably don't have one that looks exactly like this, but that's okay. We just want to make sure that we're combining all those elements, that you're answering the prompt, making sure that you're restating your answer in that first sentence, making sure that you're supplying text evidence to support your answer, and explaining that evidence. Okay? So even if you didn't pick the same evidence that I did in this paragraph, still make sure that you're connecting it back to how that first person point of view emphasizes the narrator's concern and affection for the dog. Okay? You could pick a lot of different ones. These are just a few. There's evidence throughout the text to answer this question. Okay, guys, well, that was week 1. I hope that you were able to get some work done. I hope that you enjoyed the text and were able to interact with it. And I hope that you're able to share it and paraphrase it with your whoever's at home. Okay. We will be continuing to do this, and I will not always be the one on here, but I hope to see you again, and making sure that you're just checking in each week to see whatever materials are available for you for each subject. Okay. So I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy, and if you're one of my kiddos, know that I love you so much, and I really do miss you, even when you drive me bonkers. Okay. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day, and enjoy your time at home.